In the late 1970s, the fashion industry revolved around appearance, but it lacked a deeper understanding of identity, influence, or emotional reality. Models were often treated as replaceable faces, valued for looks but rarely for personality. Then came a young woman who didn't fit the mold. Carangi didn't simply participate in fashion, she altered its rhythm. Her presence carried intensity, unpredictability, and something the industry wasn't prepared to handle. By the time people began recognizing her impact, the system that elevated her had already failed to protect her. Her story isn't just about fame, it's about how quickly brilliance can be consumed when there's no structure to support it. To understand her rise, you have to begin long before the cameras, in a life already marked by instability and emotional fractures that would later shape every decision she made. 2. Gia Marie Carangi was born on January 29, 1960, in Philadelphia, into a household that was far from stable. Her father worked long hours running small businesses, trying to provide consistency, while her mother struggled with emotional challenges that affected the entire family dynamic. When Gia was just a child, the tension between her parents became impossible to ignore. Arguments were frequent, and the home environment often felt unpredictable. At the age of 11, her mother left, a moment that left a lasting emotional imprint. For Gia, this wasn't just a separation, it became a defining experience of abandonment. It shaped how she viewed love, attachment, and trust. From a young age, she learned that stability could disappear without warning, a belief that would quietly influence her relationships and choices in the years ahead. 3. Beyond the instability at home, Gia's early years were marked by experiences that deeply affected her sense of safety. She carried emotional wounds that were never openly addressed, leaving her to navigate complex feelings on her own. In a time when conversations about trauma were rare, especially for young people, she had little support in processing what she had been through. As she grew older, these unresolved experiences began to influence her behavior and emotional responses. She developed a guarded yet intense personality, someone who craved connection but struggled to trust it. This internal conflict became part of her identity. While the outside world would later see confidence and boldness, internally, she was dealing with vulnerability and confusion that never fully healed. These early challenges didn't define her entirely, but they laid the foundation for the complexities that followed. 4. As a teenager in Philadelphia during the 1970s, Gia stood out in ways that weren't always welcomed. The environment around her was traditional and often resistant to change, but she had no interest in blending in. She expressed herself through style, attitude, and openness that challenged social norms. Inspired by music and subcultures that embraced individuality, she adopted a look and identity that felt true to her. She didn't hide who she was, even when it invited judgment. This willingness to live authentically made her both admired and misunderstood. While others conformed, Gia experimented with fashion, identity, and self-expression. It was this authenticity that would later captivate photographers and audiences. However, it also meant she faced criticism and isolation early on, reinforcing her independence but also deepening her emotional distance from others. 5. By the time she reached her late teens, Gia had started working in local nightlife spaces. These environments offered her something she hadn't consistently felt before: attention, energy, and a sense of belonging. Nightclubs became a place where she could express herself freely and feel seen. However, they also exposed her to adult influences and lifestyles at a young age. The atmosphere was vibrant but unpredictable, filled with both opportunity and risk. It was during this time that someone noticed her, not for experience or credentials, but for her presence. There was something about the way she carried herself that stood out. That moment would change everything. Soon after, she made the decision to leave Philadelphia for New York City, unaware that she was stepping into a world that would rapidly elevate her life, and just as quickly destabilize its six. New York in the late 1970s was a place of transformation. Creativity, fashion, music, and nightlife were colliding in new and exciting ways. It was an environment where bold personalities could rise quickly, and Gia fit naturally into that energy. When she arrived, she didn't come with formal training or a carefully built portfolio. Instead, she relied on instinct and presence. It didn't take long for industry professionals to notice her. She had a look that defied expectations, dark-haired in a space that favored a different aesthetic, and expressive in a way that felt raw and unfiltered. Her uniqueness wasn't subtle, it was immediate. This authenticity caught the attention of influential figures who saw potential in her ability to stand out, not just visually, but emotionally. Her entry into the modeling world was unusually fast. Unlike many others who spent years building their careers, Gia's rise happened almost instantly. She quickly became a favorite among photographers who were drawn to her intensity and unpredictability. She didn't simply pose, she brought emotion into every frame. This ability made her images feel alive, something audiences could connect with beyond surface-level beauty. Within a short time, she was appearing in major publications and working with respected creatives. Her success wasn't just about appearance, it was about presence. She represented a shift in what modeling could be, less about perfection and more about personality. This change resonated strongly within the industry, marking the beginning of a new era where individuality became more valued. As her career progressed, Gia became one of the most recognizable faces in fashion. She appeared on magazine covers, worked with top designers, and became known for her distinctive style. Financial success followed quickly, bringing opportunities that few achieve at such a young age. However, the pace of her rise left little room for adjustment. There was no gradual learning process, no time to build stability. Everything happened at once. While the industry celebrated her success, it didn't necessarily provide the support needed to sustain it. Behind the scenes, she was navigating pressure, expectations, and personal struggles that continued to grow. The contrast between her public image and private reality became more pronounced, setting the stage for the challenges that would soon emerge. A significant turning point in her life came with the loss of a key figure who had provided guidance and stability. Without that support, Gia found herself navigating the industry alone. The absence of someone who understood her both professionally and personally created a gap that was difficult to fill. She continued working, but the emotional impact of this loss began to surface in subtle ways. Her behavior changed, and the consistency that once defined her work started to fade. While she still had opportunities, maintaining them became increasingly difficult. The structure that had helped manage her career was no longer there, leaving her vulnerable in an environment that demanded reliability and control. As pressure increased, Gia began to rely on unhealthy coping mechanisms. What may have started as part of a social environment gradually became something more serious. The demands of her career, combined with unresolved emotional struggles, made it difficult for her to maintain balance. Over time, these habits began to affect her professional life. Missed appointments, unpredictable behavior, and declining reliability became noticeable. The industry, which had once embraced her uniqueness, now viewed these changes as risks. Opportunities became less frequent, and relationships within the industry grew strained. This shift marked the beginning of a decline that would be difficult to reverse. By the early 1980s, the consequences of Gia's struggles were becoming impossible to ignore. Her once unstoppable career began to slow, not because her talent had faded, but because the industry had little tolerance for unpredictability. Fashion thrives on precision, tight schedules, high expectations, and constant performance. Gia, however, was no longer able to meet those demands consistently. She missed shoots, arrived late, or sometimes didn't appear at all. For an industry that moves quickly, even the brightest stars can be replaced without hesitation. What made this shift particularly harsh was how sudden it felt. Just months earlier, she had been everywhere, on covers, in campaigns, at the center of attention. Now, the same people who once celebrated her began to distance themselves. The change wasn't gradual, it was abrupt, leaving her to face the reality that success in fashion can be as fragile as it is powerful. 2. With fewer opportunities in New York, Gia returned to Philadelphia. Hopping distance from the chaos might help her regain control. Moving back home brought a sense of familiarity, but it also meant confronting the same environment she had once tried to escape. Determined to make a change, she entered a short-term recovery program. For a brief period, there were signs of hope. She spoke about rebuilding her life, about finding stability, and possibly even returning to modeling. However, recovery is rarely straightforward, especially without long-term support systems. The challenges she faced were not only physical but deeply emotional. Without a clear sense of purpose or direction, maintaining progress became difficult. The absence of the fast-paced world she had known left a void that was hard to fill. While she had taken a step toward change, sustaining that progress required more structure than she had access to at the time. Later in 1981, Gia made an attempt to return to the modeling world. It was a bold decision, driven by both ambition and necessity. She signed with a new agency, hoping for a second chance to reclaim her place in the industry. However, the environment she returned to was different. The same world that once embraced her was now cautious. Clients hesitated, concerned about reliability, while industry professionals questioned whether she could meet expectations. Despite these doubts, there were still individuals who believed in her potential and pushed for her comeback. She managed to secure a few opportunities, including a notable magazine shoot. On the surface, it appeared as though she might regain momentum. But internally, the challenges remained unresolved. The comeback wasn't just about talent. It required stability, discipline, and support, all of which were still uncertain. Even as she stepped back in front of the camera, there was a noticeable change in her presence. Gia still possessed the same striking features and natural ability, but something felt different. The intensity that once defined her work seemed quieter, less vibrant. Observers began to comment on subtle shifts. Her expressions appeared distant, her energy less consistent. These changes weren't always visible in photographs, but they were felt by those working closely with her. The industry, which had once been captivated by her unpredictability, now viewed it with concern. While she continued to receive occasional work, the consistency needed to rebuild her career was missing. Each opportunity carried pressure, and without a stable foundation, maintaining progress became increasingly difficult. What could have been a fresh start slowly turned into another struggle to hold on. By 1982, Gia's connection to the fashion world had weakened significantly. Opportunities became rare, and the industry's attention shifted elsewhere. Fashion is constantly evolving, always searching for the next face, the next story. Without consistent visibility, even the most iconic figures can fade from focus. For Gia, this transition was particularly difficult. Modeling had become more than a career, it was her identity. Losing that connection left her feeling disconnected and uncertain about her future. Without the structure and recognition she once had, she faced the challenge of redefining herself outside of the spotlight. Unfortunately, this period also marked a deeper return to destructive patterns. Without support or direction, it became increasingly difficult for her to regain control over her life. As the years progressed, Gia's life took a dramatically different path from the one she had once imagined. She attempted to adapt to a more ordinary lifestyle, taking on jobs outside the fashion world. These roles, while practical, were far removed from the environment she had known. Adjusting to this change was not easy. The contrast between her past success and present reality created a sense of frustration and loss. Without a strong support system, maintaining stability remained a challenge. She continued to struggle with personal issues that affected her ability to move forward. While there were moments where change seemed possible, they were often short-lived. The absence of long-term guidance made it difficult to build a new foundation. In an effort to regain control, Gia entered a more structured recovery program in the mid-1980s. This time, she stayed longer and showed signs of genuine commitment. For several months, she worked toward rebuilding her life, attending therapy and focusing on stability. It was one of the few periods where progress felt real and sustainable. During this time, there was a sense that things could improve, that she might find a new path forward. However, recovery is not just about time. It requires ongoing support, purpose, and emotional healing. Once she left the structured environment, maintaining that progress became increasingly difficult. Without consistent guidance, old patterns began to return. Despite her efforts, the challenges she faced were deeply rooted, making long-term change incredibly difficult to sustain. As her situation became more difficult, Gia's life moved further away from the world that once celebrated her. She faced circumstances that reflected how drastically things had changed. The support she needed was limited, and the options available to her became increasingly constrained. During this period, her health also began to decline, adding another layer of difficulty to an already complex situation. Medical understanding at the time was still developing, and many conditions were not fully understood or effectively treated. This created additional uncertainty and fear. For Gia, the combination of personal struggles and health challenges made recovery even more complicated. What had once been a story of rapid success had now become one of survival. In 19